Welcome to a webinar on WorkCenters and filter options that are available on WorkCenters. So today we will be doing a training. We're first going to do an overview of WorkCenter filters. Second, we'll get into filter definitions and then on to filter values. Then we'll look at a page that lets you do an inquiry on filter values. Then a report you can run to validate the filters. And then most importantly, a wizard that allows you to copy filters from one user to another. We'll talk about some of the things you need to be aware in the process of migrating using application data sets so you can move your filters from one database to another. And last, we'll end with scopes, a new part that has been added onto WorkCenters. The target audience is system and security administrators, also developers or any support staff for a PeopleSoft system, and also super users in a particular business area. David will be your presenter today. I've got experience in the ERP space for 20 plus years. I like doing new modules, customizations, even turning things into configurations with event mapping, upgrades, mentoring, and training. A passion to teach, and I've been a presenter at Hug, psadmin.io, Collaborate, and Reconnect. So let's jump right into PeopleSoft and look at WorkCenters and kind of the overview of how they work. So during this session, we're going to look at the GL WorkCenter in the financials database. Most of what you see today should translate over to the other application environments. So we're going to go to General Ledger, and we're going to go to GL WorkCenter. Now, I am logged on not as VP1 or one of the power users in my PUM image, but instead I have logged on as a new user who may not have all of the filters set up. You'll see that if you have a lot of red in the My Work area of your WorkCenter, you probably need your filters set up as well. You'll see I have some already set up. We're actually going to concentrate on the ones that are not set up. When they are set up and you click on something in My Work, it will then actually give you data over on the right-hand side based on your filters and based on the work that you need to be dealing with. If we go to Edit Filters, we can edit the filters for the first area, for the filter ID called GL Journal 1. And when we go to edit that filter, we will see that it's set up as the US 001 recording ledger for the fiscal year 2017. You'll see that GL Journal 2 is not set up. And if we were to click in there, we would see that that also can be set up with the business unit, ledger group, fiscal year, and other fields that are available to us. But because nothing has been added and the required fields have not been met, it's going to be in red, as you see here. You'll also notice that some of these repeat the same filter for other My Work links. And so once you set up the filter ID of a particular ID once, it can be used throughout that WorkCenter. So in this one, we're actually going to look at setting up the GL Journal 2. Now we could do that from the edit filter, and this is going to be per user. So it's the user logged on will actually be editing and managing that filter. Well, we're going to show ways from an administration where you can actually watch that as well. For another piece of this overview, besides what you see here today with editing the filters and seeing them react, we will also go take a look at where these are set up, just as a general overview of where these are configured. So that is underneath on the WorkCenter setup, underneath Enterprise Components, WorkCenters and Dashboards, and underneath Configure Pagelets. This is actually where we'll be in these menus within this folder for the most of this training session. Let's take a look at Configure the Pagelet. On here, we're going to look at the GL WorkCenter, which begins with GL. And underneath the My Work, you'll see that here's the same tasks under the My Work that we saw on the GL WorkCenter are also here in the setup for the My Work groups. Again, and as well as the filter ID, GL Journal 1, GL Journal 2. And as you add new rows or define current ones, you'll find that at the bottom, it lets you list out the filter ID. We'll actually cover how those are created, but this is how they're actually used within the WorkCenter to assign that filter ID to a My Work link. So our next thing is let's take a look at those filter definitions. Under the Configure filter definitions, we're going to look up the one that is the GL Journal 1 and 2. So we're going to go straight into the number 2. And then we're going to zoom out the page just a little bit so we can see a bit more of the page. So starting at the top and discussing most of the fields we see here, we've got our filter ID and description. We also can make this public. If it is not public, at the bottom, you would actually set up the different access. And it can be by perm list, role, or user. Most of the filters will probably be public that you'll come across. This next piece is the model record, and this is the records and that the fields will be taken from, but there's some additional things that are taken from this as well, in particular the prompt table. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this model record, and we're going to do it take a look at it in App Designer. File open. And we're going to open the record called Journal WC Search View. And though this may actually be a view that goes somewhere, we're using it mainly for the model. It might be used in other places within the app package for the MyWorks, but the nature of the model record is so that it has all the fields that are available to us as well as the prompts, so that we don't have to go and add the prompts on our filter if they've already been set up in the record definition of App Designer. So you'll see on the business unit, we have the SPBU GL non-view. When we come back to PeopleSoft, you'll see that business unit has been added as a field. We've marked it as active. The field label is what is the label we want on the actual questions when people are filling out the filter. And we'll cover that in a moment. With the prompt table, this was automatically brought in so that we don't have to type that. And that actually came directly from the table because it's the model record. You can change that, but most of the time you'll keep that of whatever was brought in. Coming back to the field label, underneath the field label, you'll see that for this field label, there's several labels. only one is the default, and unfortunately, I believe it lists the default is right here. No, that's actually the business units required. It actually does not specify which one's the default, though it does look like this one is in there. Nope, it's actually an underscore and a space. So though you can't find the default, I believe the default's going to automatically appear here. For a smaller example, the fiscal year, you'll see that there's only 8 different types of labels. These are the same labels that if you take a look in App Designer and open the field, for fiscal year, you'll see that there are 8 different labels. And even though only one of them is the default, the rest are all available. Where this comes into play is if you want to have a different label, and we'll see that with our test button, this is the label that would be here. That is what you can actually change. So we've covered the field label and the prompt table. Next is the required flag and the restrict operands if required. So if it's a required flag, the user does need to specify that in the filter, or it will be in all red like we saw in our first example on the overview. In addition, you can restrict that the only operands or operators that are allowed are just the equal and in operand. And you can also exclude that the in be used. So let's take a look at what that is, because you'll notice with the fiscal year and accounting period and even description, some are required, some are not. So when they are required, it's only going to allow the equal or the in. It wouldn't do a contains or greater than or less than, because you can't be as restrictive on what's allowed there. So you definitely have to have that field because it is required. But if you get down to like fiscal year, it's only an equal sign, but accounting period has more because it's not restricted. So we'll come down and say that accounting period is required, but we're not going to be restrictive. And when we hit save, you'll notice that it turns on anyway. And in fact, if you turn off the required flag but don't turn off the restrictions, it turns off for you when you hit save. So these two are very exclusive. There may be times when they're not, but even in the description, if we try to turn one or off, they either both are on or both are off. So I've not seen a way where those actually, one can be required but not restricted, and vice versa. So coming back up to here, we could exclude the operand. Let's see here. Let's go back to our test, and business unit did have an in, but we could restrict that and say, no, you can only choose one at a time. When you do, the equal sign is all that is allowed. Let's go back and turn that off so that we can use the in operation. And if we say it's in, you actually have a different push button for the filter where you can pick several things. And there we list all 3. Again, we're in a test mode of that filter criteria. There's also display order in case you need to reshuffle things. If you are using the in select property, besides repeating the status and field label, there's also the search field name. So actually on the prompt, what field should it be corresponding with? And second, what is the description that should be displayed? So most of the time, this search field is going to be the same field that is over on the field name column. And the search field description is going to be whatever makes the most sense as a descriptive field. If there's not one, then it'll be the same one as the search field name. When you get down to like business unit line, you'll see that even though the label's business unit line, when searching, we'll actually go up against the business unit and description on the prompt table. Because if you go back to here, you'll see that even though it's business unit line, it's using the SPBUGL non-view because there's not a special view for every type of business unit that doesn't go into a business unit field. You can actually utilize the same prompt for business units, but on the In tab, you would actually specify what the corresponding field is on the prompt. So that covers the major pieces about configuring a filter definition. What you can do is leverage one that's already existing, which I recommend. I do not recommend you modify these unless you understand the ramifications of modifying a delivered filter. They could be updated in a PUM, and they could be used in other work centers, though most of the time the GL journal one is only used in the GL work center. The next piece is looking at the actual filter values. So what we looked at already is the filter definitions. Now we're going to look at different values. In fact, for the remainder of the things we're going to look at in this menu structure, except for the first and third one, which we've already looked at, the rest are all tied to an operator or something to do with operator ID. So we're going to pick the configure filters, and I'm going to say no on this page. Actually, I'm going to say yes and make sure. I have been modifying that page, so I need to make sure I hit save. So on the filter values, you can look at filters, but you have to pull it up per user ID. So I'm going to ask for all the journal 2s. And what I find is that there is one for VP1, but I'm logged on, as you can see up here, I'm logged on as PS Geek. PS Geek does not have one. And in fact, if we go back to our GL Work Center, we'll see that it is not, it is still in red. So we'll do a new window and take a look at the GL Work Center. Again, because I'm logged on as PS Geek, we'll see that the second link in the My Work is still incomplete journals. All right, so we're going to add a value. We're going to do this for the PS Geek user, and we need to do that in uppercase. So we're adding the filter for the GL Journal 2 for PS Geek. And here we're going to pick this US 001, the recording book for the ledger, and the fiscal year 2017. And we're going to hit save. So now on the Work Center, if we go to refresh it, we will see the incomplete journals now has 2. And we go there, we'll actually see that we have the data for 2 different rows. Now the filter can now be modified by the user now that it has been set up by the admin. And again, on the configure filter values page, this is so an administrator can come in and either add a new filter value or modify an existing filter value that a user may be having problems with. So the admin can get to it, but it's stored in the same place as what's on the Work Center. So if I come in and edit the filters for the GL Journal 2, when I do, I see that as a user in the GL Work Center, I can see what has been set up for me. I can actually change it to 2018, And I'm going to say OK. It wants me to refresh the Pagelet. So we can see here that now that we've changed it to 2018, we only have one row. If we come back to the administration page, and I'm going to go back to the filter values, if a user is called in, I'll plug in that name right here. These are the filters I know they have set up, the GeoJournal 2. You'll see that from the admin, it is now changed because it is from the same record. It's now 2018. If you need to look at several at the same time, you can go to the filter values inquiry. So here I can say I want all the GeoJournal 2s. I can ask for a particular name, a particular field name. And it says, yes, these are all the people for the fiscal year field of the GeoJournal 2 filter. These are all the values that have been set up. PS Geek is 2018, whereas VP1 is using 2012. You can also take off the field name, and when searching, you'll see I have 18 rows. It first shows business unit, ledger, fiscal year, and so forth. So that is a way you can see more values from different users spread across this page. This next piece is called Validate the Filters. And it's an actual job that you can run. Here I've already set up to run for the filter GeoJournal 1. I can run it for number 2. You can also tell it only to do the required fields. So we're going to run that program. While that is running, we're going to take a look at a previous run when this has been executed. And it doesn't do a nice report, but instead it puts it into the standard output. So when you come here, you'll see that there's no data besides when it started and when the program ended. And that means that it found no filters that needed to be validated or adjusted or cleared. So I've run this in other systems with more PUM data, and what it appears to do is clear out those fields where there's an invalid value being stored. So this process is probably going to be seldom used, but that appears to be what that validation is doing. So this, we're not going to cover the delete filters value, but it's pretty clear kind of what that allows you to do, where you can go in, actually delete filters from a user. If a user was no longer working, there's probably not a need to delete those filters. But if a user was having problems and you wanted to delete those, this would be an option. So what I want to cover next is the filter values copy wizard. This allows you to copy filter values from one person to a group of people. It's also useful that if you had 5 to 10 or even 100 users using a particular WorkCenter with lots of filters, instead of teaching each person how to change those filters or have to even create them on day one of a new WorkCenter, instead you could set up one of the users, or perhaps a super user, have them test those filters, even adjust them, and then come back to this tool and copy those to everyone else in their group. So over here, we're going to be looking at VP1. And for VP1, we're going to take a look at the filters that are the GL. And we're going to filter 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so what's selected will be on the right-hand side, and we'll say next. Now we need to select the users that these would be assigned to. But you can't do this by user, you have to do it by role. What I'm going to do is ask for everyone who's a PeopleSoft user, so then I can quickly find the PS Geek we will select that user, and over on the right hand side it says that well, the users we selected, PS Geek. It also says that some filters exist. So the values we're sending over, which were the GL Journal 1, 2, 3, and 4, now we know PS Geek has a GL Journal 1 and 2, so it's a true statement that filters already exist, and it won't override them unless you select this override existing values, which we will do for this example. And when we say next, it gives a summary that we're bringing these filters over for this user. We will click on Create Filters, and it's all done. And then you can click here if you need to do more copying of filter values. So let's take a look and refresh this. And you'll see that now we have none for both of them. And the reason why is for GL Journal 2, which we're familiar with, we'll see that it's using 2012, which was from VP1. We copied it over, and thus we would have the filter what we saw for VP1. These last two sections, I want to talk about the application data sets and then scopes. So application data sets, and also known as the data migration workbench, is a way to migrate data that's not found inside the app designer. So it's kind of like Data Mover, but a better way to be able to move things so that you kept those parent-child relationships in sync, because the application data set is only going to move those as a group if that's how you package it together. It also has a better way to be able to see a criteria or where clause so that you don't have to go to Data Mover and have to hand code that statement. So I want to list a couple of the most important data sets. WorkCenter has two parts with just the framework. There's a tools portion, which you get to underneath People Tools, and it's the WC definition, and I list the without user preferences, though there is one with user preferences. The next one is the WorkCenter Enterprise component portion, and this is the WorkCenter configuration that we showed earlier, where you have the 5 tabs, 4 of them being where you define filters for the My Tasks, as well as the query, reports, and links. Real briefly, back on the WorkCenter tools portion, this is the without user preferences, and let's talk about where those user preferences are. Again, that is for the tools portion. It's the data set that starts with WC, and that is underneath at the top level, not within the My Work or the links, but at the higher level above the tabs, because these tabs are actually created at the tools portion of building a WorkCenter. And there's also user preferences. Let me go back. Underneath there, you can actually personalize the tools portion of WorkCenter. And you could actually, if given the right permissions, you can even add your own pagelets. Decide what's selected or minimize the order. So the user, if given permissions, can change things. That is the user preferences that is referred to if you want to move the WC definition with the user preferences. Most people are going to move that without. With the WorkCenter configuration, there is also user preferences for that as well, which you can find underneath here, where you can personalize. Underneath the links, it starts to open up a bit, because there, if given the right permissions, you can add your own group to have your own links to your own objects. And so if you've allowed the users to modify that in a non-production environment, then when you move the enterprise component portion, you'll also want to make sure you pick user preferences. But again, these first two, I would use the WC definition without user preference, and then WorkCenter configuration when migrating and perhaps building a brand new WorkCenter in non-production, or you've taken a WorkCenter from demo or from a PUM image and you want to play with it, configure it, get it working in non-production, and then migrate it to production or to a test environment. These are the basic two that you would use. These last two are two of the new things we showed today. One is the WorkCenter filter definitions, called WorkCenter filters, and the values, WorkCenter filter values. So that is how you would actually move any new definitions and new values. What I found is most of the definitions for filter definitions are in new 9.2 environments, as well as the WorkCenter tools portion, but I find the enterprise component portion is usually missing in a new installation. It will be in demo or in a PUM, but it won't always be in a brand new system database that's given as a starting point for development. So I find that having to move the WorkCenter enterprise component portion from a PUM to development is a common theme that people have to do. So I want to talk about one last piece, and this is something called scopes. If we go back to the Pagelet, to make the WorkCenter underneath the enterprise components WorkCenter, we're going to look at the GL WorkCenter first. Underneath the My Work, there is an enable scope. The billing module has this already on. Well, we're going to take a look as if we leave it on, if we turn it on for the GL WorkCenter. You can also decide to enable the scope for everybody or only certain people, be it perm list, role, or user. So I'm going to set this to be for PS Geek. And I'm going to activate the work settings. And its page has already been saved. Now whenever I come in and refresh the GL WorkCenter, instead of the edit filters, you're going to see the My Scope and a new edit button to configure scopes. So underneath the scope, it's going to come with the default one, and I can also add more scopes. Underneath each scope, you can go to configure links. And underneath configure links, this is back to what you were familiar with from earlier, where you had the GL Journal 1 and 2, and you can actually edit the filters. But all underneath the My Scope. You can also go and edit the other one, and this time we're editing the filters for test 2. Now where this is very helpful is if you have 2 or 3 sets of filters you want to do. So the scope is at a higher level. And so you may have the GL business unit for maybe a hospital, the main hospital, and then you may have it for all your clinics. Maybe you have 2 business units and you need to have different filters for what you're looking at. Or perhaps you have different states or regions that you need to look at, or different schools within a university system. That would be where scopes would be helpful. There is one downfall about scopes, is that when you are using scopes, you can no longer use the filter values to be able to administer that. So the scopes must be administered by the user and cannot be copied. Let's take a look at some different things about the scopes. Now that we've looked at an example, so filters versus scopes, the scopes are at a higher level than filters. And again, great for regions and other things like that. So based on my Oracle support document, the scope and filters are distinct in different constructs. But filters can be controlled by the admin as well as the user if they have the proper configuration security. Scopes, though, can only be created and controlled by the user, not the admin. So I definitely would use the scopes for super or power users. And I would give scopes then just to those users and give everyone else filters that only when a super user needs to be able to have different sets of filters, then I would turn them over to using scopes, but just for those users. So some final points as we wrap up the training today. Filters are found underneath the Enterprise Components, WorkCenter Dashboard, Portal Structure, and Content menu. The first item is filter definitions, and that third item on the menu is Configure WorkCenter Pagelet. All the rest are going to be operator specific. So the best approach I've seen, set up and review your filter definitions, and then configure the values for a super user, then copy the filters to other users. And then only use scopes if there's a power user who has a business need for that. And then use the ADS to migrate the configuration and the filter definitions and values if needed. So be sure to check out our website, PeopleSoft Tricks, for lots of free resources, as well as our YouTube channel and tricks as we add them each month.